Hello, welcome back to the Transfer Flow podcast. And on today's episode, we're talking all things Champions League with the penultimate round of fixtures. Barcelona had one of the greatest games of all time against Benfica. PSG and Manchester City face off to see who's going to make it through. And then we bring you a transfer story as well with Yoane Wissa's rumoured move to Nottingham Forest. That's all on today's episode. So, Ted, we're back. We're back talking Champions League. The Champions League first round is still happening in January. Feels strange, but when it delivers like this, you can't really complain, right?
Honestly, like the content is so spectacular. and last night it wasn't just one match. It was one match that we're gonna sort of like put front and center, but like there were so many enjoyably weird matches that happened last night, and throughout this whole round. Like the funniest thing is, like, you know, Real Madrid are locked out of a top 8. You're just like, really? Did that happen? And there are some teams that look like they're going to potentially get buys and make it into the official knockouts. That is unexpected. So I think that, you know, I wasn't on the fence. I've loved this sort of this format and what it's given us so far. Like it could turn bad, but it's given us great stuff. And then last night it just ramped it up to 11.
Yeah, kind of when we expected. The worry with this format was that these games in January were going to be unwatchable. And then last night, okay, when I described the Benfica Barca game as one of the greatest games, I guess I'm not necessarily saying... I'm not necessarily talking in pure quality, but it was exceptionally watchable, right? Because Benfica went up early and kept on going up to the point that they were 3-1 up against Barcelona. But the degree of chaos in this game was kind of astonishing.
I don't know whether the world is going to let us put this out as a meme, but the Szczęsny particular moment of madness is going to live in my head for all time. And I want it to live as like a GIF that we could put out into the world. So check our social channels to see if, you know, the UEFA hammer comes down and knocks us out, because that is a moment. And there were multiple moments, but that is a moment that I just looked at. It was like, he's not going to do that. He did. Oh my God. It's just like this amazing goalkeeper, 35 yards out, looking at the ball, comes flying into a relatively fragile center back for one of the best teams in the world. No apparent reason, actually, for that to happen. Maybe Szczęsny's a little rusty and a little old, but it was exquisite.
He ran such a long way to do it, I think
far.
is what's so funny about it. And then, of course, he gave up a penalty a little bit later as well. But I mean, Pavlidis had a hat trick here, and to me, this looked like when Barcelona have played this really, really high line this season. I mean, for that second goal, their high line is on the halfway line, which I always find stupid. Like the forward knows when he's onside when he's got the halfway line under his boots.
You know, actually, that was not the most notable one. If you watched last night, watch Ta in the Leverkusen Atletico game. Like, look how far he's up in the goal. And Jonathan Ta is one of the world's best athletes at center back. He's a little bit bigger and slower than he used to be, but he's like 15 yards into the attacking half at that point.
Oh,
and then he's got to go 1-to-1 on a race down to the other side. So it happened a few times last night. It was just this evening of football, as long as you were not watching Club Brugge Juventus, because fuck Juve and their 5 shots and losing half of my bet there. But the rest of it was just so good.
Yeah, the Juve game I looked at 25 minutes in, and Club Brugge had I think 2 shots and Juve hadn't had one. Yeah, and I was like, yeah,
it was 1 shot to 1 at the half, according to the official stats.
God. Oh my God. Okay.
So this Barcelona match, sticking on it, like there were just the 4 penalties, right? Mm-hmm. two for each team. No, sorry. Two for Barcelona. The Pavlidis one that happened on the 30th that Szczęsny gave up. There was an own goal from Iraola as well.
Yeah, so, and you see him get up and immediately like claim an offside that was like not possible at all. It was amazing.
I never know if somebody's standing up and be like, "Yeah, my bad. I got that. That one's on me. I'm sorry."
But then at the end, okay, you know, Benfica are ahead all night, and to be honest, it looks like it looks when you look at the stat line, it looks the way that a pressing team getting broken looks, right? Like Barcelona have 74% of the ball. They allow 10 shots, but they allow 3.3 expected goals. And you're like, yeah, that basically is what it looks like when you play
And
a
that
high
doesn't
line
include the own goal, because own goals don't factor into it. But yeah, if somebody had gotten that shot off, that would have been like almost another full goal. So I was watching this match like out of one eye, and like I was also potentially I was on Barcelona last night at like minus a quarter. I was like, they need a result. Like this will be. I figured that they're really good, and they're possibly the most difficult team to face the first time in all of world football right now, because like you can't really figure out how good, how quick the attacking players are. And then once that press is sort of on top of you, like the first time you see it is really, really difficult. Now, if you see them regularly in league play, it probably dampens that a little bit. But as long as they're not imploding in the Champions League, like that first time you see them should be very difficult. They imploded last night, and somehow, and this is so we had a discussion in the lead up to this, and Patrick Patrick I think is still on the fence. He's like, was the goal? I'm sorry, you explain it better.
Okay, so the commentators and the cameramen are like looking upfield, like waiting for the goalkeeper to punt the ball upfield, and instead the keeper punts the ball, perfect head height, right at Raphinha, and it cannons off his head, loops back over the keeper and into the net. And my question was, how much does Raphinha know about the direction that ball goes in after it hits him? Because
it's a 20-yard header
spinning round.
It's just like from a million miles away.
It's unbelievable.
He's standing there. He's looking at the goalkeeper like, ha, 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 whatever. Like, because they're going to high press anyway. And then the goalkeeper goes to boot it, which is what you're supposed to do against the high press that's particularly dangerous.
Yeah.
And he just smashes it off of Raphinha's head. And there's a really good question. I would love to see the reverse angle that has Raphinha's like face. Like, is he looking at that ball? He just happened to like be in the place. But then his body language after it sort of looks like he's like got a little cushioned header that goes up and over because it might be coming his way. And you and I both wondered if that was like a symptom of CTE. I don't know.
Yeah, probably. I mean, but then at the end, everyone kind of looks like they have CTE by the time the game's over. Like, because then Benfica had 2 good penalty claims right at the death. This is, by the way, in the 96th minute of this is in the 6th minute of 4 minutes out
4 minutes at a time.
And they have 2 good penalty shouts, and Barcelona clear it. It finds Raphinha. Raphinha cuts inside and scores the winner. And then they were waiting to see if this goal was going to be allowed, or if they were going to pull it back for one of the, what I would call, extremely obvious penalty calls that they should have got. So it was like a classic Barcelona comeback in that it shouldn't have happened, and it should have been prescribed by law. Like that's my feeling about this game.
Have there been other such matches in history?
Who would know? Like, this is the thing. Okay, so like Barcelona fans, whenever Barcelona fans talk about the remontada against PSG, I always think, have you no shame? And I guess I should know the answer to that question. Like, no, they don't. But that game was an absolute classic of the form of them just getting nonsense penalty shouts. They got 2 or 3 in that game. It was a joke. And here again, bullshit pen, but they stick it away. Benfica got denied their penalty shouts. I mean, it just feels a bit miserable to play a team like Barcelona. They're good enough. They don't need to get fake penalties.
Yeah, but funnily enough, they're not good enough in the league at the moment, which is really an interesting one too. Yeah, I mean, look, it's a high variance style, and they are glorious to watch when they're pulling things off. And they did have a really interesting, fascinating match to score 5.
Yeah.
Goals. But Pavlidis, by the way, was somebody that was kind of an interesting potential target in the summertime, and didn't end up getting a move. May be one of those types that definitely gets a move, because, like, you know, the Portuguese clubs kind of like to move on after a bit, and keep cycling through potential targets or selling them at a profit. And he had a good one last night against quite a good team at times. So the other one that we should talk about is probably the Atletico Madrid game, where
Atletico
Madrid, Bayer Leverkusen, Frimpong was on fire last night. Like
Mm-hmm.
he's facing a really good defensive team, and he had them on skates. There was quite a nasty little red card tackle. Guy left his boot in, like thunked somebody in the back of the thigh. You know, in olden days, that's not a red card. That's just a yellow. And these days, where VAR can go back and look and see sort of, yeah, that's a little too much intent for us. It ended up being a red. And then Leverkusen go up 1-0.
Mm-hmm.
Nice little goal. They were pretty good at attacking, and the Athletic just created a goal out of nothing to get it to 1-1. Then there was a second yellow to make that 10 men on both sides, and the final goal was also another one where you're like, wow, I can't believe that happened. The funny thing about last night was I should probably talk about my gambling just a tiny bit. We don't
Mm-hmm.
mention it as often here. So every Friday I do an analysis column for the English Premier League and English Championship, and I've been crushing that. I've been on like the sickest run, and it's just continued to go on. And it felt like early in the season when I was losing, and I'll tell you, I've been honest about like where I'm at the entire time. There's no fluffing the numbers. It's all public records, so like you can't even do that. But early in the season, it felt like I was having a poor run, despite the fact that like everything should have been going my way in different ways. The numbers were all good. I felt like the reads were correct. You know, it's just football. Football's highly variant. It's a tough sport to bet on. Since that time, basically from November onward, I've just been stomping. And people that joined the premium subscription at that point, like they have made a lot of money if they followed along with my picks, or they just use it as analysis to make their own choices, which is totally the point of this whole thing. Anyway, this comes back around to being honest about how things worked out for you. I was up 2 units last night, so I won 2 more bets than I lost, and I did not deserve that stuff. Like given the madness that occurred yesterday and how many insane things had to get me over the top. So yeah, like PSV Eindhoven went up 3-0 on 3 corners, 3 goals off of corners. Like
Yeah.
that feels like something that should. But I was on the dog there, and they end up getting a red card and end up being 3-2. So I only lost half a bet because it was a 0.75. I lost half a bet on the horrible Juve match. And then I was on Barcelona in this match, and there's just no reason why I should win this. Like none whatsoever.
But you're on like Raphinha form now though, where you know sometimes it bounces off your head and goes in. Like that's that's what's happening when you're hot. You're hot.
Yeah,
But I mean,
I'd like to get back to like having good process for a while. Like the luck is good and the money's good, but I prefer to have good process and good outcomes.
sure. But I mean, to go to the Atleti Leverkusen game again though, it's like this is a there was something in the newsletter about this. Kim was talking about kind of like Atletico's a very unusual defense in that they do sit deep and they're like, you don't come to any of the areas where you can damage us. You can do whatever you want anywhere else you want, but you don't come here.
You cross
And I
this
mean,
line, you die. You cross this line, you die.
Yeah,
You knock on
exactly.
my house, I don't come out.
And in this game, it was like you can see the conservatism, like you can see it in the XG. It's like 1.6 XG share between them. I also looked at the touches in penalty areas, and these two teams combined for 28 touches in each other's penalty areas, and the average Premier League game sees about 50. But then obviously the red card happens, the Barrios red card. Barrios is quite an interesting player, but then you get a goal that is the right back crossing to the left back, and when I say the right back, it's like Mukiele, who's like kind of a centre back come right back, crossing to Hincapie, who's a centre back come left back, who's just hanging out at the back stick for the goal. But this game, I thought, really did showcase why Atleti thought Alvarez was a perfect fit for them, because that first goal is so Griezmann-y, young Griezmann-y.
Absolutely. And he has been a monster for them. He's on like a fantastic run of form in the Champions League as well. And he does just have this ability to be both incredibly dogged, very physically talented in slightly unexpected ways, and also just a very good attacker. And that's the thing that Griezmann. So when I don't know if you were following me back then, but Griezmann was one of the first players I ever wrote about. I wrote about him on my own little personal blog, I think in 2013. And back when I was starting to do research as to like, you know, which types of players might be interesting for the future. Like he was like a 22-year-old kid, I think at Sociedad at the time. And I looked at him and I was like, okay, not only are his attacking numbers interesting and he's a wide player and he can create, But the most interesting thing about him is like he really racks up defensive stats. Like that's a very strange thing, and he's done that for his entire life. And it's one of the things that made him a legend at Atleti, and a little bit of one where like the French national team functioned at their very best with Griezmann involved, even though he wasn't always around and involved that way. I think you're right in that Alvarez has the mentality and the output that makes this Atleti team just a little bit more dangerous. And he creates that out of nothing. Like there's nothing going on that should happen there that should be dangerous. Ta feels like, yeah, Ta's a giant. And he's like, I think I got fouled. And he's just, yep. 60, 70 yards away, suddenly the ball goes in the net and it's 1-1.
And then the second goal as well. I mean, it's just like, that is what you get from this guy who is used to playing off another forward, right? You know, Correa's kind of like going through tackles, falling over, manages to poke the ball through, and the next thing, Alvarez is around the keeper and has scored the winning goal. It's really, really impressive stuff from him. And yeah, like you say, I think he's up to 8 goal involvements in the league. I think he's got 6 in the Champions League alone. So he's really flying right now. And you just can't. The ability for him to keep the ball under pressure at speed and get a shot off is so valuable. But yeah, I do remember that. I do actually remember you writing about Griezmann when he was at Sociedad. I think this was the first time that I was reading your writing. I remember you talking about signings for Arsenal and Griezmann, and Lacazette was on the schedule back then, and it was also the first time that I was thinking about the idea of, you know, players taking a leap around 23. So I still kind of come back to that. There you go.
Also in that lot was a guy named Wissam Ben Yedder that ended up having like an awesome decade career, and he was like, I think peanuts at Toulouse. Might have moved for like 2 million euros at the time. It's like, yeah, he looks like he's going to be a real pain. He's tiny, but sort of tiny and square, almost like the Aguero or Carlos Tevez. I love those guys that are like, well, we were talking about your build last time around, and yeah, built like you.
Yeah, little Shaqiri. But you know, Atletico Madrid now up to third. I mean, they could be overtaken tonight by Arsenal, by Inter, by Brest, I guess. But yeah, they're going through.
I think the most interesting thing for me about Madrid this season, or Atletico Madrid, is that they were terrible in the first game of the year, and I was like, oh man, Atleti away are just like such a terrible bet, and so now you look at it and you're like, I think that nobody in the Champions League would want to face them this year. Like it looks like Simeone has, unless they get significant injuries, it looks like Simeone has them firing in exactly the way that he wants. And yeah, they're just like a miserable matchup for anybody involved.
Just the idea of having to defend against someone like Alvarez, and then, you know, maybe having to defend against someone like Sorloth is absolutely horrible. Like the
Yog Sorloth, the Eldritch God, Eldritch horror. However depends on which way you're looking at.
Well, I mean, look, it was an evening of horrors for some teams, because Dortmund managed to lose to Bologna, which, you know, like giving up 2 goals to Bologna is kind of special. Like that's like seeing a comet, you know. And they finally sacked Nuri Sahin. He's lost 4 games in January. That was a long time coming, that firing, eh?
Archie Reintut has a little thread on Blue Sky today about the dissatisfaction, but also the dysfunction of Dortmund, and how they seem to have like really lost their way in recent years in like team building and identity and stuff like that. I thought that was an interesting characterization. You should just go find him there. In the gambling write-up yesterday, I was like, you cannot make me bet on Dortmund away. I will not do it. I refuse. And they were up 1-0, and you're like, oh, sure. And actually, they were up 1-0 on a penalty that deserves being watched. And it's really unusual for us to say that, because you're like, yeah, whatever, penalties. But Serhou Guirassy does a panenka that is so softly lofted, but is lofted at an angle. And the goalkeeper dives and then gets a hand up at the same time. And
gets like 3 fingers to it.
Out. And it's just like, it might be both the most embarrassing and hopeful panenka from a goalkeeper perspective that you've ever seen.
My God. Again, it's one of those ones where I think, don't celebrate that. You should just you should accept that as a near miss that you got away with. But like Dortmund are in like Sideshow Bob form at the moment, where because the second goal in this game, And actually, their match of the weekend against Frankfurt, there's loads of stuff like this where it feels like a defender maybe successfully makes a challenge, but they just can't like regain their balance fast enough to like poke it away, and it just somebody nicks it and it goes in. They cannot get out from under their own feet right now. It's just, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that they basically have to see out the rest of the season, hope they make
Yeah.
the Champions League, but they're not great. And actually, there's some interesting teams in the Bundesliga this year that are causing them trouble. And they need a head coach that they can support with like sane recruitment. And I'm not sure that they've been able to do that for a while. So
It'd be interesting to see who they target. I mean, over the last couple of years, they've been incredibly boring and bad with the guys they've hired.
I think
So
Rosa was probably the most interesting recent coach they
definitely.
had. Then they went the opposite way and got these weird defensive coaches that I hated, and I think actually, and at the end of the day, Dortmund fans hated too. Now the rumor mill just immediately jumped back the other way, and Roger Schmidt, who actually is a Schalke fan and had been rumored as like a potential Schalke replacement for a long time. He's the first name on top of the list, obviously available, but again, a totally different style than what they've been playing.
I would love that. I just always want to be able to watch a Holger Schmidt team every week because I adore him so much. But you know, I've also read stuff about what if they tried to get Andoni Iraola or something. You think it's interesting. That was interesting.
That'd be a good choice. I think, yeah. I mean, if Iraola wanted to go there, that's pretty interesting. Iraola's name will be on every list, right? He's the right one. He actually, like, if Milan had been saying they should have tried to yank him over there, like that would have been a really interesting appointment.
Yeah, interesting one. Okay, well, shall we move on from the games? Well, unless there's anything else you want to talk about from the games last night, but honestly, really, people should just watch all the highlights of pretty much every game. There's so much good football.
Yeah, don't watch the Bruges highlights, and Monaco Aston Villa was quite tight, but the rest of them, like, definitely like take the time. It's fun. And the craziest thing is like these highlight videos are only supposed to be 3 minutes, and somebody
Yeah.
had to get permission in order to make the Barcelona one a 6-minute highlight package. You're sure that this is like a legal limit that no one's allowed to do, and then they're like, "There's 9 goals in this. How do you want us to cover? Like, this is insane." Let's sandwich the transfer inside here, so like you get a delicious little piece of meat alongside of the Champions League bread.
Okay, so we've got Yoane Wissa, who has been linked with a move to Nottingham Forest. Nottingham Forest, kind of out of nowhere, made a bid for him, apparently in the region of about 22 million. Now, obviously, you know, top line stats this season, extremely impressive. Despite missing time, Wissa's up to 11 goals, 2 assists in about 1,400 minutes. Expected goals lines up with that output, you know, and there aren't penalties in there or whatever. So just on the scoring numbers, everything looks good. I guess one of my issues with Wissa is I'm like, he's really, really good for Brentford. How good is he for another kind of team that doesn't maximize this stuff?
He's so very bald too. You
He's
just
very
have
bald.
to. He's just a beautiful small bald man. So Wissa's story is he was on some lists for us back when he was at Angers, owned by Ajaccio, and we liked him due to his flexibility and his pace. And there were feelings that we couldn't necessarily get him to the places that we needed to get him to, because I think at the time he was just a Congolese. I wasn't sure. So citizenship at different points has been like a big deal in getting people into England. So we really liked him ages ago, and then he went to Lorient and was very good there, and then Brentford stole him away from Lorient for like a pretty reasonable fee, and they did it kind of at the right time. So they got him at about 25-ish, right? So looking at him, the things that he's got going for him are he can play with his head up. And so like when he used to play more out wide, now he plays through the center for Brentford, but he's also the type of player that can sort of like knock the ball on into space as part of their very direct type attacking flow. He was very fast and used to get lots of through ball shots, which, everybody that likes that type of style loves to find players like that. And yeah, he's been quite durable for the most part, and has been, I would say, possibly even unexpectedly good for Brentford at various times. He doesn't have the the kind of hype as Mbeumo, but I think that he might be as important to them, which leads us into the argument around pricing. You and I have talked about, and I've talked about on my socials, that Brentford are probably in a spot where they could sell this summer. Mbeumo was like a big rumor last summer, knowing that they're in a spot where they're very comfortably mid-table. Nothing's going to happen either way. They're not threatened by the toilet bowl, and so they would look to potentially be willing to cash in. I'm not saying that they are, but it's the type of team that is sensible enough to be able to do that. And Wissa and Mbeumo are like the two pieces that are most likely to go. Now, this was before anything was public. Like, we didn't have anything behind the scenes, but it just made sense. It added up to making sense. So now publicly just this week, and the Oracle has said it himself, like there was a 22 million pound bid. They'll be arguing about price, but I suspect that this one will get over the line. Because it just, again, makes a lot of sense. It just has to be the right amount of money.
Yeah, to me, it feels like, looking at that price, Brentford would probably ask for 30 and they'll meet in the middle somewhere, which I think is, he's got a year left on his deal with an option for another year after that. But looking at the age he is, and even, the fact that they've managed to get some good production out of Schade recently as well. They've still got the striker they bought last summer for big money, who has done like nothing for them because he was injured. So yeah, I don't know, if there's no real threat there, then it does feel like this is probably a good time to say goodbye. At Nottingham Forest, if he goes, do you just see him as a sort of? Do you think that they'll want to use him in those wide roles? Because right now, he's not doing the dribbling that we saw from him when he was younger. His expected goals assisted has kind of halved from what we've seen historically during his time at Brentford. So do you think the plan is kind of like backup striker to Wood, or do you hope that those talents are still in there if you park him out wide?
I think it's a flexibility option for them. They could try for another sort of thunky Chris Wood, and in fact, like Liam Delap might be the best player out there. And I don't, Ipswich still like scrabbling to. Ipswich will not be able to keep Liam if they go down. Like I think that one is a little too well known, and he'd happily stay in the Premier League because it's important for his development. Although honestly, a year down in the Championship, like being able to face everybody down there might be even better for him. I think that you're not going to find a like-for-like replacement. They're not even looking for a like-for-like replacement, which means that potentially Wissa is going to give them a little more flexibility in how they play going forward, which, like, he gives them tactical setups that they don't have with a player that can run onto things centrally, as well as players like Alanga, who also can sort of gallop and get on his horse to be able to play more transitionally. And as we keep saying, like, transitional play this year seems crazy important for all of these teams. Having more players that can help you play in transition, and Brentford do that among the best in the league, is nothing but a plus. So I think that's why they're looking at it. It gives Nuno like another option in the bag of tricks, but also allows them to have a reasonable backup in a slightly different style than they currently have.
Yeah, he's clearly a smart player and an effective player. Like, I don't know. I think it's pretty good. Obviously, it depends how crazy the money gets, but I quite like this for Forest. And Brentford kind of need to retool fairly significantly. They've got, with Brentford, it does feel like they've got so many points of failure in the squad. It's like, if this guy's missing, we're in serious trouble. If this guy's missing, we're in serious trouble. And that's, before you get to the point that Frank at some point will surely be taken. We say this every season, but I just kind of can't believe that nobody's made a really hard move for him yet.
Patrick is a fanboy of certain head coaches. I don't know if everybody knows that, but is very clear in how his eyes get like a little sparkly when he talks about people.
Dreamy. He's a dreamy man, and he's just very convincing as well, which I just think is such an underrated part of it, right? Like, he's clearly just so good at communicating with players, with the press. I think that that's just such an important skill, especially when you go to a bigger club and you are going to get shit all the time if you get too prickly.
Speaking of convincing versus shit all the time, maybe we should go on to PSG's ability to score goals in the Champions League.
Man, okay, so this is obviously a very funny matchup, Man City versus PSG, because City are 24th, PSG are 26th. But if you look at kind of expected goal difference per 90, these are number 5 and 6 in the Champions League, which is extremely funny stuff. But City, if City win and Dinamo Zagreb lose to Arsenal, that's probably it. Like they're safe. PSG probably need a draw and a win to make it through. If Dinamo gets something at Arsenal, all bets are like they're in trouble then.
Yeah, absolutely. And so PSG have been swept aside by teams that are good that have sort of men, right? Like full-grown men. Arsenal was the first time. It used to be this way with Arsenal. It absolutely used to be this way where Arsenal would trot out a bunch of very technical, very talented kids or players that were just slightly undersized. They would be like, 58th percentile to 70th percentile players in terms of size. And then they go face Chelsea and they'd be fine with Chelsea for like 60 minutes. And then the last 30 minutes, the weight difference would just kick in and they'd be so exhausted and they'd been kicked so much that they couldn't play very well. It felt like Arsenal did that to PSG earlier in the season, where like you found these really young, moderately young, talented kids who looked great for the most part. But yeah, they just were able to be sort of pushed aside. And then Arsenal dominated that game physically, scored, I think, a set piece goal. And then it just was never particularly close in the second half. That's happened to PSG multiple times in the Champions League. And now they have to face City. And the problem with facing City is that, one, they might be coming out the other side. But even just the last 2 weeks, City are a team that are like a boxer that was the greatest boxer in the world and is now aging out of their sort of like useful period. And they still have all the skills to be able to attack you and hit you any particular time. But it's like a middleweight bout where like, you need to actually have good defense and you're expecting that the rounds are going to go quite long or the fights are going to go quite long. These days, instead of like never getting touched by somebody else's fists, like they actually are starting to scar up and they're getting punched in the face regularly by even West Hams of the world. And so they actually need to go toe to toe and punch through these teams in order to make things, to make them win. PSG can create real problems at attack. This is going to be just the best popcorn match. And it might not even be a great match to watch because both these teams are probably a little scared. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it because I think that both these teams have to actually attack in ways that we never see in a Champions League sort of group stage-ish or whatever we're calling this, table stage.
And, from PSG's point of view, they were pretty good against Atletico Madrid. Atletico Madrid is like one of the exceptions to this. They created quite a bit there and they didn't give much up. But yeah, they kind of have been what PSG critics think they are, right? Like when they're up against crappy teams, when they've been up against Girona, Salzburg, PSV, they've just kind of battered them. But they did deservedly lose to Arsenal and Bayern. I mean, the good thing I think from their point of view is Luis Enrique is not going to be wedded to some idea of this is how we must play. He's going to be practical about it. And I do think that Arsenal game, he'll realize that he'll have learned from that. Now, obviously, Arsenal have like quite a defensive setup and they have this enormous kind of ground-eating defensive midfielder in there. But City, despite all their work in January, none of whom can play, obviously, in this game, they still haven't addressed midfield at all.
Kvara can't play either, so I guess that's like the perk.
That's true, yeah, that's true. But you can just punch through the middle of them. So, and you've got, and runners, you've got Dembele, you've got Barcola, you've got Hakimi, you've got Mensch, you've got Doué, and then guys who can find them. You've got Neves, Vitinha, Fabian Ruiz. There's so much passing quality and smart runners that I think City are going to give up some chances in this game. I still think that they'll create their own chances. I don't really trust PSG, and PSG might be missing Marquinhos. They may even be missing Hakimi for this match.
Marquinhos has actually for like 8 years now quietly been like maybe the third most important player in like every single PSG team. They bought him when he was really young. He was super flexible and like he was always like a defensive midfielder that cleaned things up and sort of like kept them together. And then for a while he was a center back that did sort of the same stuff. So yeah, anytime that he's not around, like that's a big risk for them. And again, it just lends to my theory that says that these two teams are going to go after each other because that's the best way to to get potential points, which they both need.
Yeah. So I think this is the one that everyone has to watch tonight. I mean, the high stakes, two good but flawed teams. It's kind of the dream matchup in that regard. Is there anybody else that we should be paying attention to tonight? Because Real Madrid are obviously down in 22nd, but I think they're against Salzburg. And if you're a Red Bull team right now, you're just in a world of hurt. Like, they can't do anything in the Champions League this season.
So I have a couple of bets on. I haven't finished my championship betting, but Champions League stuff looks like that. I have Bayern away at Feyenoord. Feyenoord has some injuries. Bayern still need to get wins. So I'm on Munich on minus 1.5. So basically, that means that if Munich only win by 1, I lose my bet. If they win by 2 goals or more, I win my bets. Then, yeah, there's some interesting ones because like some of the in the gambling write-up, I'm like, so Inter games so far, Inter Milan games, in 6 matches, they've had 8 total goals scored. Not a lot in the Champions League. Meanwhile, they're facing Sparta Prague in Prague. And Prague matches, I think, have had 25 goals scored in just the 6. And you're like, how do you create a total off of that? Like, what should that be? So really quite interesting there. Arsenal Dinamo Zagreb, like Arsenal need to get a result to lock everything up. And they desperately want a week where everybody else has to play and they don't. So like that's a big deal too. Zagreb, the last best bastion for points there. Did they go Girona away on the last weekend? Is that what that is?
Arsenal, yeah. Arsenal got Girona last.
Yeah, so that's like not a fun match. So like they definitely would like to get this one put away. Yeah, Salzburg, Real Madrid. So I'm on Real Madrid -3 there. Like Salzburg have just been stomped. I would happily bet against Salzburg most of the time in the Champions League, and Real Madrid allegedly are pretty talented. Tough to tell sometimes. So those are my major ones. Leipzig Sporting is an interesting one as well. Like Leipzig are basically dead. All the RB, Red Bull, Rasenball, whatever you'd like to make up for RB are done. But then Sporting are quite a good team and I think still need some results there. So, but Leipzig haven't given up many goals and there's no reason for them to roll over at all. So I think that one actually is sort of a tense match. But, you know, all eyes are going to be on PSG City at 8:00 UK time.
Yeah, the one sad thing I think about this is that there is a little gap between kind of 26th and 27th. So when PSG are trying to get back into the top 24, there aren't really that many teams in contention for it, you know, because then you're going down to the 5.4 point teams. So a lot of these sides are really kind of one result away from basically being fine. So there's a little bit less tension in that regard. But next week,
there's only 1 week left, so they have to be, right?
And all those games, of course, kick off at the same time next week. So if there is anything on the line, you do absolutely want to get it wrapped up this week if you can. But like, yeah, look, Arsenal,
that's too many games, by the way. Too many games.
Too many games.
Is it 18 games? Yeah, 18 games at one time. Miserable. I feel like they should have split that to like nothing matches and something matches or something. At least like let us. But there's so many things that kind of matter, and also the ones that I think really matter actually is like this year you really do want to get that top 8 bye. Like it's something that, given all the football that's been played, you want the extra week off. You want your opponents to have the extra matches there as well. So I'm looking forward to it. I think that I think we were all very skeptical because honestly, the last Champions League format had produced great knockout ties as well. But this one has been highly entertaining in the group stages and still promises for 2 more match games anyway, today and next week, to give us some interesting potential tension.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that's our look ahead at the Champions League for this week. Is there anything else that you want to say before we get out of here?
Yes. We want your advice. So if you notice, I'm not usually on Wednesdays. And the reality is I don't really have time to watch enough La Liga to be good at Wednesdays. Should we keep them mostly on La Liga? If you have people that you know that are good sort of yappers, thoughtful yappers, podcast type people that also like La Liga, podcast in English, and can keep track of transfers, like let us know. put it in the comments because we need to replace Ravi or fill Robbie's slot, let's say. We're never replacing him, either spiritually or in reality. But yeah, fill up Robbie's slot. Let us know because I can't do this and do everything else that I have to do. As much as I love being on camera with Patrick, it's just there are limitations to my amount of time. So tell us who you think. And it's a paid role. So yeah, you could get paid the podcast. Think of how much you could lord over your mother by saying, look, Ma, I actually get paid to do this.
Yeah, I have to say this. Like my wife has been appearing on podcasts recently to promote her book, and she mentioned to somebody who is interviewing her that her husband podcasts, and I think that like this person's face kind of fell, into like a little mask of disgust until Emma said, "Oh no, he's paid. It's not just like
he's paid." There are like 10,000 people that listen to him every week.
Yeah, it's pretty good actually. Yeah, we're also now absolutely rolling on subscriptions to the newsletter, absolutely rolling on subscriptions to Variance Betting. And I've got to say, I really do encourage people to subscribe to Variance Betting because every subscriber adds £1 to Ted's base bet each week, right?
If you're not aware, on Fridays, I have gone back to producing video content that talk about the Premier League bets that I'm making on the weekend. And yes, the way that we're doing is I've moved it so that, originally early in the season, it was £200 a bet. Like, I saw something that looked kind of fun. Somebody allowing them to place bets of a size like 1 cent per every Instagram subscriber or something they had in blackjack, something completely nonsensical. But I was like, that actually sounds like fun. So yeah, I think the staking right now is about £350 a bet. And that just goes up as we get more subs on Variance Betting. And thankfully, I've been winning my socks off. And so people are pretty happy being subscribers over there.
Great. Well, thank you very much to everybody who's watched or listened today. Make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel. Leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. Do get in your suggestions for a podcast co-host. I retain veto rights, obviously, but please just let us know if there's anybody who you think would be good and you'd like to hear more from. And we will catch you next time. Enjoy the Champions League. Bye-bye.